Well, I think Trump has trapped himself. He has obeyed the Zionist lobby. He has obeyed the Israeli regime. He's gone into a war that he thought he would win. He should have known. He should have known after the 12-day war. But I believe that U.S. intelligence is deeply flawed. I don't think it's the Israeli regime giving false intelligence or fake intelligence. I think U.S. intelligence is probably uh, deeply embedded or deeply they believe very much in these narratives on Iran about it being brittle and falling apart. I really don't think Western intelligence agencies know much about Iran. I think they mostly believe what they want to believe. But in any case, he went into war, which failed, and then he restarted a much bigger war, failed again. And I think he's desperate for some sort of victory. So perhaps I'm guessing, total guess, that maybe last night the intention wasn't to attack, and he was hoping that the Iranians would capitulate. I don't know, but that's just not going to happen. We know that that's not going to happen. The Iranians are not going to budge from their conditions in the MOU. And if at some point there is an agreement, the Iranians are going to be demanding more. And they're going to be demanding certain things up front because it's obvious that the United States is completely unreliable and untrustworthy. It was like that before Trump, but under Trump, it's just completely unreliable. Trump's signature means absolutely nothing to anyone. So in future, if there's an agreement, Iran is going to be demanding about the siege on Yemen. For years, they've imposed a siege on women and children in Yemen. That's no longer acceptable. And Iran is going to be demanding about Gaza. True, it is implied in the agreement, in the MOU, but I don't think. I think after this, it's going to be more. There's going to be much more focus on this. Of course, the problem with Gaza, as we discussed before together, is the fact that leaders of our region really betrayed the Palestinian cause and went to Egypt and signed that uh, document, basically giving full support to Trump and whitewashing his genocide. And these countries were guarantors. They were supposed to be guarantors, these leaders, these regional and global leaders who went to Sharm el-Sheikh. And yet, ever since then, the Israelis have been slaughtering Palestinians on a daily basis. And now, during the past few days and weeks, it's becoming much worse. And today, it's been mass slaughter. It's getting worse by the day, and the starvation is increasing. They're bombing medical supplies in Gaza in order to make people die of disease and make children die of illness. They're not allowing food to get in adequate amounts, and also those who have special needs, they're intentionally preventing those foods and those medicines to get in, so that those children will die because they want to cut the population. They want to decrease the population, whether it's by bombing them or sniping them or starving them or killing them of disease. All of these methods are being used by the Israeli regime to bring down the Palestinian population. I mean, it's genocide that is taking place in front of our eyes, but Western media has walked away. They've always been trying to look away, but now they know that the Zionist regime has no legitimacy. They can no longer pretend that it's legitimate. So instead of reporting it and lying and twisting the reports to the benefit of the Israeli regime, they know that's not going to work anymore. So they just don't report. They just look away. They look somewhere else and try to make us forget what's going on in Gaza. But that makes us more responsible than ever before to, whatever we're talking about, to go back to Gaza. If we're talking about the criminal activities that are being carried out on a daily basis in Lebanon against the people of Lebanon because of Hezbollah's support for the Palestinians, we have to still go back to Gaza and remind people about Gaza. We're talking about Yemen, where there's a siege imposed against women and children in Yemen. Still, we have to go back to Gaza. When they bomb Iran, we have to also remind people about Gaza, because that is the focus of their criminal behavior. And it's also the reason why Iran, Hezbollah, and Yemen are being attacked. It's because their support for the Palestinian people, the fact that they cannot accept genocide. But in any case, those countries that went to Egypt for that betrayal, they're fully responsible for what's going on. They do nothing. And they make it more difficult for Iran to negotiate over Gaza because Trump and his henchmen say that, well, we've already negotiated Gaza and we have an agreement. So even though that agreement is not being, they're not committing themselves to the agreement. Saudi Arabia, just one thing before we continue, because you mentioned Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is quite extraordinary. I mean, its leader, Mohammed bin Salman, we know he has what his history is like. He once beat up the former prime minister of Lebanon, Hariri. He murdered a journalist, Jamal Khashoggi, someone who I knew. And we disagreed on many things, and not everything, but he still killed him and got rid of his body in Turkey. He waged this genocidal war against Yemen with Obama greenlighting it, and then he besieged Qatar, which they were cooperating together with in Syria, in the genocide in Yemen, in Libya, but the Saudis and the Emiratis turned against Qatar, and then Turkey and Qatar tilted away from them and away from cooperating over the genocide in Yemen. So this is a person who is not exactly an ideal leader. And now he provoked this war with Yemen and bombed the international airport as an Iranian passenger plane with a crew of men and women was about to land, enraging Iranians and carrying out an act of war against Yemen. So he provoked Yemen. And then when Yemen struck at Saudi oil installations in retaliation, he was too cowardly, or the Saudis were too cowardly to acknowledge that Yemen did it because they didn't want to confront it. They blamed the Iraqis. Yemen took responsibility. Iraq said nothing happened, and they bombed Iraq and enraged Iraqis, killing both Iraqis and Iranians. So Saudi Arabia is turning this into a regional war with Americans, by the way, because the Americans bombed Iraq with the Saudis. The Americans played the primary role. And in Yemen, it is believed that the Americans pushed Saudi Arabia to bomb the airport and then later the port, Al-Hudaydah. So the Saudis are bringing catastrophe upon themselves by provoking Yemen and Iraq and angering Iran even further. And then when the Americans want to strike, they call the Americans and say, "We're in trouble. Don't strike." So it's quite amazing what sort of position the Saudis take. And then the Saudis try to create a coalition against Yemen. And then they claim, I don't know if it's, we'll have to see, but they claim that certain countries have joined this coalition. So instead of these countries joining a coalition to help Gaza, they join a coalition led by Saudi against the people of Yemen, who the Saudis have imposed a siege upon for well over a decade. Yeah. I mean, it's the upside. We live in an upside down world void of any morality.
Indeed, and what Saudi Arabia is demonstrating is that the leadership of the region in these so-called Arab states are nothing but misleadership. And now there are reports, Professor Marandi, that the UAE, in that Wall Street Journal report on the United States backing down the United Arab Emirates, was said to be the one country in the region that was demanding Trump take more decisive action on Iran. So they were backing the strikes that the U.S. and Israel eventually backed down on. And then another report that has just come in from the Wall Street Journal as well, acting, I guess, as taking the reins from Barak Ravid today from Axios. They say that Iran is considering a preemptive strike or preemptive strikes, as Iran is now aware of Trump's political vulnerability and are looking to exploit it. What do you make of these reports, Professor Marandi? Maybe you can start with the UAE on downward to the idea that Iran now is going to conduct strikes preemptively.
Well, about with regards to UAE, I don't. I really, I can't say this is true or false. The Wall Street Journal is not known to be very honest, and they could be uh, putting out propaganda to uh, create a wedge between the UAE and Iran. The UAE officials, after the fighting, during like a couple of months ago, when they were negotiating with the Iranians, the UAE officials told Iran that when the Israelis were working hard to create divisions between Iran and whether that's true or not, that's debatable. The Iranians will figure out what role the UAE plays in all this. It has more than enough connections across the region and beyond, and intelligence to figure this out. So it's possible, but again, I don't trust the Wall Street Journal. I don't trust any mainstream Western media outlet. But with regards to Iran carrying out preemptive strikes, I'm not quite even sure what that means. I mean, Iran did not start the war. Iran did not restart the war. As we speak, the United States is carrying out war against Iran. The siege on Iranian ports is an act of war, and it's targeting ordinary Iranians. That's the objective, to hurt ordinary Iranians, so that they're waging war. And last night they were, at least hypothetically speaking, they were prepared to carry out an all-out assault on Iranian uh, power plants and civilian targets. War crime after war crime after war crime. No condemnation from the Europeans, no condemnation from Western uh, funded NGOs, no condemnation from Canada or Australia or New Zealand or the European Parliament, no condemnation from any of the mainstream Western media, nothing, which I think says more than enough about whether these are credible institutions and whether they ever really cared about human rights and human dignity and justice and that sort of thing at all in the past or in the present, let alone in the present. So there's no such thing as a preemptive Iranian attack. There is no ceasefire as we speak. When the Iranians struck American positions in Kuwait and of course in Jordan after the Americans halted their 13 days of attack, that's not preemptive. Just because America stopped bombing, that doesn't mean Iran is going to accept a ceasefire. Iran didn't accept any ceasefire. And as I said, we have a siege on our ports. So if Iran carried out a strike, there was nothing preemptive about it. And if Iran tonight, let's say, carries out a strike on American positions, which is possible, they did that in Jordan and in Kuwait, that wouldn't be preemptive. That would be a continuation of the war. When the Americans launch war against the Iranian people, they can't complain about any Iranian retaliation, and they cannot complain about Iran striking them in order to prevent their gathered forces from being a threat to the country. So there's nothing really preemptive about it. But that's the narrative that we see. That just like the renewal of the fighting in the Western media, they say, well, Iran struck tankers in the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, and that's what restarted the war. Whereas, and then Iran violated the deal, the MOU, which we all know that that's just fake. The Americans violated the deal, not the Iranians. The Iranians opened the strait. Business was picking up. The number of ships passing through were increasing. Meanwhile, the Americans refused to force the Israelis to leave Lebanon. They refused to hand over Iranian stolen assets. They lifted the sanctions on Iranian oil exports and then reversed it after a few days. They expanded the sanctions regime, a violation of the deal. They continued to threaten Iranian leaders and the Iranian people in public statements, a violation of the deal. And then they opened a corridor in violation of Article 5 in the Strait of Hormuz. And the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis collaborated with them to get ships to go through that, despite the fact that the MOU said during the period when the MOU is valid, it is Iran that manages and normalizes trade through the strait. So the Americans were violating, with the collaboration of these countries, and all of its commitments, literally. And then, of course, when Iran, after days of warning the Saudis and the others and the Americans and the Kuwaitis and the Emiratis not to use that corridor and to use the Iranian corridor, after they ignored Iran for days, then the Iranians struck those ships because it's a part of the deal.